Hey, it's been a while since I've made a video specifically about the subject of feminism, but it's once again become relevant because of this Mansion House incident. Relevant insofar as how society processes how a man reacts to something versus how a woman reacts to something, more specifically, how a woman is treated versus how a man is treated. So that is really the talking point here. And that incident at Mansion House. I knew it would make news, but I was surprised at how widespread it got covered, even in the American media networks. Um, and it's provoked strong debate online. What's interesting is the sort of comments I've seen online do not reflect the way the press is reporting it. And interestingly enough, it isn't just the Guardian and the Daily Mirror and left-wing publications that are attacking Field. I mean, the Sun had the headline Jack the Gripper or Sack Jack the Gripper. I mean, the bias that we're seeing in how this is being reported, the way Mark Field is being vilified, is really unfortunate. Um, I stand by what I said in the previous video. I haven't seen anything to change my stance on that. In fact, I did see a video with the woman in question, and she said that she travelled from Wales for this protest and she expected some resistance, but she wanted to have a conversation with a few people. Well, I'm sorry, that's not very convincing. You don't barge into a room shouting at the top of your lungs with those little, had some sort of horn type device, and then say, "Oh, I just want a conversation." If they want a conversation, then have a conversation, but you don't do that by barging in. I'm not going to repeat everything I said specifically about Mark Field and how he responded to that. There's a lot of ways you can look at it. A lot of people are pointing out these women were in red dresses, so they couldn't possibly have concealed something. But that actually produces another issue. They had bare arms. Now, let's say Field or any male security, for that matter, had grappled the women by the waist to push them out without using brutality. Then you can imagine the scenario where there'll be accusations of inappropriate contact. A man cannot win in this situation, and that is the problem. All these virtue signaling people, these male feminists like Owen Jones, that are coming in and vilifying um, Mark Field, the man himself immediately apologized, and he's been suspended. But here's the thing: if he had, let's say she had come in and he got up and punched her to the face, then I would say, yeah, definitely, not only should he be sacked, he should be arrested. That would be completely disproportionate. That would be brutal. Sadiq Khan was saying we live in a world where there's violence against women, and he was joining the bandwagon of vitriol against this man, and I just think it's very unfortunate because the opinions online are about 50-50. In fact, I would say there's slightly more of the persuasion that it was the protesters that were in the wrong. And many women, I have seen many women defend Mark Field because they recognize that this is not the brutality it's being made out to be. It was a bit rough. I will say that. It was a bit rough. Um, but what other way could he have tackled her? I mean, she wasn't walking past peacefully as she claims. She was charging past. The Chancellor was meters away. I think it's pretty outrageous the bias that the media, left and right, is showing on this. And it gets into a deeper issue of double standards on gender issues. Um, I'm not going to say the legal system, for example, is perfect for women in every sense. For example, the number of rape convictions could probably be higher, and I think there's a lot of women, for example, who've been victims of grooming gangs and rapists who understandably feel frustrated at a lack of justice there. So I don't think it's entirely a case of women get everything they want. I'm not saying that. However, there are legitimate things. If a man and a woman commit exactly the same offence if it involves violence, you can be damn sure the man is far more likely to get a custodial sentence than the woman. In my view, both should get a custodial sentence. I'm not arguing there should be softer laws for men. I think male thugs should face justice. But why is it okay for women to be violent? That's what's so infuriating about these male feminists who virtue signal, people like Sadiq Khan and Owen Jones. They have nothing to say about violent women, nothing at all. I mean, has either of them condemned the outrageous verdict where that girl gang in Nottingham all escaped a custodial sentence despite the vicious beating of an innocent young Egyptian woman, which left her dead? Even if you go with the thing that, oh, there's no direct causal link, that she had a pre existing medical condition, that was a violent assault. And common sense and reason and fairness dictates the people responsible should be in jail. But why is feminism relevant to this? Well, firstly, just to clarify, I'm not saying that every feminist, every individual person, particularly women who call themselves feminists, practice double standards. I think male feminists do, particularly in this country. I think they're virtue signaling. It's very, very, very rare that you'll see a male feminist condemn a violent woman, for example. But female feminists, I've seen a little bit of diversity in terms of, I know of female feminists, that is, women who describe themselves as feminists, who are pretty consistent, to be fair, and they're not hysterical man haters. They're not they don't embody the sort of negative stereotypes that third wave feminism often gets. Having said that, those negative stereotypes don't come from thin air. They do come from the very strong perception that there is double standards. The likes of the Women's Equality Party will say, "Oh, we don't hate men," and they're not going to get up on stage and say, "Oh, men are terrible," because they're in politics. They know they have to be a bit more careful than that. But they do promote the sexist idea that men have everything and women are downtrodden victims. This is very problematic. It's a bit like certain black people who promote the idea of white privilege, and therefore all white people are the enemy. So when feminists go on about how awful the patriarchy is and how terrible things are for women, ignoring the fact that, for example, high risk jobs are often disproportionately occupied by men. I'm thinking of, for example, oil rig workers, pylon engineers, people like that. It's highly occupied by men. These are dangerous jobs. That's not to say there aren't women involved in dangerous jobs, but I'm talking about the proportion here. And here's the thing, if women have it so hard in society, if feminists want us to believe this idea that we're living a big overbearing patriarchy, why is it so difficult to criticize feminism? Why is it a male politician, for example, and I'll cite Dominic Raab as an example, immediately gets attacked if he questions feminism or if he doesn't call himself a feminist? This to me demonstrates just how powerful feminism is in our public institutions, in parliament, in the media, across the board. I'm not one of these guys that kind of lives bitterly thinking, oh, these feminists hate men, but I do feel resentful of the blatant double standards and the fact that women get away with sexism. Why is that? What saddens me most of all? These feminists are so influential that I think they've managed to convince a lot of people who are otherwise intelligent and open minded that if someone criticizes feminism, that somehow goes hand in hand with being against women's rights. I insist that you can support the human rights of women and men. You can stand up for women's rights. You can acknowledge areas where women maybe are more impacted than men. You can talk about all those things. And you can simultaneously criticize the hypocrisy of third wave feminists. I mean, Dominic Raab went on to describe the things he has done, the work he's done to try and I forget the exact specifics, but to help women in maternity, for example. But that's not enough because a man like that who would say he's not a feminist or who's criticised feminists, as far as they're concerned, he's a monster. And what's happening now with Mark Field? He's being vilified as a brute. This is just so, if there's evidence emerges that, for example, Mark Field has actually you've been guilty of domestic violence or something like that, that's a different matter. That should be investigated. But I think most people looking at this incident would say, actually, this was proportionate force. It was a little rough, but if she had been armed, the point I would make back in 2010, and I probably mentioned this in the previous video, but it's very important because there's this assumption that, oh, they're women, therefore they must be harmless. I mean, all the headlines are like Tory MP grapples woman protester. What's a woman got to do with it? I'm sick and tired of this idea that let's have equality, but let's, give female privilege in incidents like this. You don't barge into a room with all known intentions and expect people to be okay with that. I think probably in retrospect, Mark Field was a little bit reckless in taking it on himself, perhaps. He should have left it to security. But I do think security have questions to answer how they let these women get in ostensibly without passes. I just find it very, very frustrating that there is so, so, so much pro feminist bias in the media. Even Piers Morgan, who's often criticised feminism, was, joining the bandwagon of criticising Field. So we need to have a situation where the media, it's naive to say, oh, they need to be absolutely neutral. They're never going to be that, but they should at least try to reflect public opinion, or at least acknowledge what public opinion is. And the public opinion on this, the sort of comments that people have been leaving, are far more 50-50 than this narrative the media is putting out. Like Tory brute attacks woman. It's pretty much the narrative. I don't know much about Mark Field. I don't know what sort of man he is. Like everyone else, I've just looked at the video. And that's my perception of the situation in that video. No one there, none of the guests could have known what the intentions of those protesters were. And if you take the view that we should all be able to just barge into an event uninvited and yell over people, that to me is an absolute recipe for anarchy. I just think it's very sad. I mean, to me, trying to portray this as a brutal incident of violence against a woman actually um, downgrades real violence, with acid attacks on women, thugs who come home because their football team has lost and brutalize their wives and girlfriends. Those are things that are reprehensible. Those are things that need to be really taken seriously. But when a protester, male or female, barges into an event, no one knows what her intentions are. I know people are saying she had the climate change thing over the sash, but so what? That doesn't mean that she's not capable of extreme action. I mean, environmentalists in particular believe that their cause is so important that they could do anything they want. They believe that the campaign, the cause, i.e., the planet, is of such importance that they can therefore do anything they want. But there's another fundamental issue here, which has nothing to do with feminism, and it's the irony, and the Chancellor pointed this out, that the UK is actually doing a lot more than many other developed countries on environmental issues. And it sort of demands that these eco extremists, and that's what I'm calling them, because of the attitude that they could do whatever they want, that the demands that they're making are just unrealistic. I know they feel strongly about the issues. Well, I feel very strongly about a lot of things. I feel very strongly about weak judges. But I can't barge into a courtroom and yell, you should be fired, and then, you know, not expect security people or police to forcefully remove me. In society, there are rules, there are conventions. And ultimately, what Mark Field done was remove a disruptive protester. He took her by the back of the neck. Just try that. Put your hand on your neck, right? People will say she's a woman, so it's good, but okay, bit harder. But as far as I know, she hasn't been seriously injured. I saw the interview. She didn't have some big bruise on her neck. Nothing was broken. It's not like she was choke slammed onto the floor. Something like that would have been outrageous. And like I say, if that had been the case, then I'd say it's disgusting and Field should be arrested. But that was not the case. He firmly, forcefully even, removed her. That is not the same as being brutal. And I think semantics is important here because the way semantics is thrown around in a case like this, this man has been totally vilified, utterly vilified. And I think that's a real bullying actually, the way he is being vilified and portrayed as this monster because he panicked and he done something maybe he shouldn't have done. But many people actually support that. So I really think we need to have a conversation, a debate in public discourse about double standards when it comes to men and women. Why is it that we talk about equality and we say, oh, women can do anything they want, they can, and there's the whole thing about, you know, the irony here is there's now a campaign to make it illegal for advertisers to show women in traditional feminine roles. So there's actually a big emphasis on the tough girl image. Girls can be soldiers, they can be footballers, they can be boxers. And yet, if a disruptive woman is removed from an event, poor little woman, she needs to be wrapped in cotton wool. How awful. What a monster. So there's a mixed message being sent out. Either women are treated equally or they're treated like, delicate little flowers that cannot be touched. I mean, this is just in that sort of circumstance. And again, the Boris Johnson incident might also highlight double standards. Why is it when a couple are arguing, the concern is immediately for the woman? It assumes that women can't be violent, that women can't be guilty of domestic violence. I think the reason why so few cases of male victims come forward is because there's still a stigma. Male victims are told that they're weak, that they're pushovers. I'm not saying this for Boris Johnson, incidentally. I'm just making a general point. Um, that's why so few men come forward, because on one hand, there's the alpha male types, blowhard, laddish guys who will laugh at them and say, "Oh, you're pushed around by a woman." But then there's also the feminist types who will say, "Oh, well, he must have done something. She must have been defending herself." There's always an assumption if a couple row, oh, well, the woman must be in danger. And the sole reason for that assumption, the sole reason, is that the average woman is physically weaker than the average man. But that doesn't stop her getting a knife. Doesn't stop her taking. A child could do damage with, for example, a pot of boiling water or cooking fat. You don't need to be physically strong to do damage with those things. So we need to have a candid conversation in society about double standards with what women can do and what men can do. That's not going to happen because the media and so much of our public institutions are absolutely influenced by feminism. There's just an enormous intolerance to the way third wave feminism conducts itself, to the way it tries to shout people down, to the way it vilifies people, to the way it tries to bully women as well as men into calling themselves feminists. I have no time for it. I'm an egalitarian. I abhor violence against women, but I do not consider this incident to be violence against women. I consider it forcefully removing a protester. Was it proportionate? Given the fact they didn't know what she was going to do, given an environment where politicians have been physically attacked, I would say it was proportionate. And I didn't think that at first. I thought it was a bit rough. But perhaps I've hardened my stance a little bit because of the hysterical reaction from those who are only interested in vilifying this man. I just don't think it's right.